I don't like Al's identity crisis in any version of Fullmetal Alchemist. It's just a very strange thing to focus on. After all, no versions of the story have an adequate build-up to this moment. So when I say that 2003 does a better job of this whole identity crisis, know that I don't mean that it's actually very good or that I even enjoy it very much. I just think it's better and that it has more of a natural build-up to it because of parts of Ed and Al's relationship that 2003 makes more extreme or adds in altogether. See, in 2003, Ed and Al's relationship is quite a bit different than in Mangahood. Because more so than in Mangahood, Al has either needed to or chosen to rely on Ed. For example, he chose not to take the alchemist exam and instead had Ed take it. Then in this section, Al is utterly incapacitated and can only gain the use of his metallic body when Ed has time to help him with that. In other words, he's completely dependent on Ed, as he has been for large swaths of the series, which I have no doubt would be a very frustrating feeling. That's not to say, of course, that there are never moments in the series where Ed needs to rely on Al. Those moments do occur. But most of the time it is Al relying on Ed or giving something up for Ed's sake. However, 2003 also does something else here that is potentially problematic. Winry is so upset at the way Ed and Al are acting that she runs away from them. Which, if Al were thinking logically, would be a pretty clear sign that he existed in some capacity prior to his soul being bonded with his suit of armor. Certainly, he might still believe that he's just a replication of the brother Ed once had, but this should serve as a reminder that Ed did have a brother, and that other people definitely believe that he is the real Al. Although, to be fair, the whole point of this is that Al is being highly illogical. Still, even if Al has been silly and naive for large chunks of 2003, it has never come anywhere near this level. Connected to this is the way that Hughes gets involved with Winry here, as he speaks some hopefully helpful words of encouragement, and tries to tell her that Ed and Al do actually need her. Of course, this also happens in Mangahood, and in all versions it's great. Hughes is just such a good guy. So, in 2003, when she very adorably brings Ed his present and tells Al that she knows the recipe so that she can make it for him when he gets his body back, it's yet another moment where Al could realize that the way he's viewing this doesn't quite make sense. Regardless, I like these added moments with Winry and Ed and how they make Ed's feelings more understandable, and help us to understand why this gulf is forming between Ed and Al. After all, Ed misreads the situation, as he thinks that Al is angry that Ed didn't save him by sacrificing those prisoners. Fortunately, Winry is here to tell him that Al definitely wouldn't have wanted that, and she gives Ed another way to view the situation. Maybe Al's actually upset at having to watch Ed even consider sacrificing someone else. All at once, Winry is being provided with a more active and important role at this point in the series. The stress of this quest is shown to be more legitimate and taxing than it is in Mangahood, and we get the very real sense that Ed is a character full of self-doubt and unspoken fears that he covers up with a cold, flippant, and sometimes sarcastic persona. This interaction also creates a relatively complex framework for Al's feelings, and multiple reasons for why he really might be feeling the way he is. Certainly, the show directly gives us one reason, but these other ones are all things that are possibly contributing to his very complex feelings. On the other hand, I could just as easily say that this whole thing is more unbelievable in 2003 than it is in Brotherhood, which honestly it kind of is, as I already touched on. After all, just to add to this, he saw what his brother considered doing for him. He saw how much his brother struggled. Why on earth would Ed do that sort of thing for a fabricated being? What would be the point? I think that's part of the reason why some people dislike 2003's take on these events and prefer Brotherhood's. And honestly, now that I'm thinking about it a bit more, I'm starting to feel that way too. It's silly, and even if 2003 built up to this moment a little bit more than in Mangahood, it's still getting way too much focus, and it stands out as, in some respects, being even more ridiculous. But from what we've looked at so far, I do still think 2003 is doing a decent job. Especially with how much Ed's countenance changes after his conversation with Winry. You can tell that Winry really helped him and moved him. It's a wonderful testament to their relationship and to her kindness and ability to understand these brothers. Once again, Ed is being put at the forefront of everything, and his emotions take center stage. However, I think right here is where problems really start to come up, because Al really loses his shit and he just runs away. On a conceptual level, I hate this. Now we're elongating this stupid conflict. If it was shortened to the point, I guess it could just serve as some simple character development for Al. But I really don't want to deal with this goofiness for another episode or two. Still, the way this show is handling its specific moments, the camera work it employs, the shot composition, the music, the character animations, is all far more dynamic than in Mangahood. In other words, the moment-to-moment pacing is better, but the long-term pacing is taking a big hit. With all of this said, I think I'm going to have to retract what I said at the beginning of this episode and the end of the last episode. 2003 isn't necessarily doing a better job. In Mangahood, at least this stuff is done quickly. More importantly, however, we haven't had to see the extremity of events in Laboratory 5, so Al hasn't seen his brother's torment. This means, at least to me, that it seems a little bit more believable that he might think his memories are some sort of construct. Of course, it still doesn't really make sense, but that's part of the point. Al's logic is breaking down. Still, in 2003, the Lab 5 thing works, because Al was under an enormous amount of pressure and stress. That trauma very well could lead to him being particularly irrational. So I guess I'm neutral about how Lab 5 impacts this moment, but Brotherhood certainly paints Al in a more positive light than 2003 does. Overall, Brotherhood Al is just way more resilient than 2003 Al, and the same goes for Ed too, and I think this speaks to a very subjective issue I have with 2003. I find Al more obnoxious here. He just feels too naive and not forceful enough, I guess. Of course, my opinion on that might change as I continue rewatching this anime for this series of videos, but stuff like going into Lab 5 with Scar or, running away from this conflict really paints him in a negative light. I know that I'm basically complaining about him being childish, which I have defended before on a logical level because, well, he is a kid. But that doesn't always make the best story. Sometimes things get drawn out too much because of that, and this whole crisis is one of those moments. And I'm starting to kind of sound like somebody who thinks Brotherhood is better than 2003. Could that be possible? After all this time I've spent talking about and defending 2003? That's honestly become a huge part of my identity on the YouTube, so what do I do without that? Who is Lowart if not someone who obsessively defends 2003? Is he even real? Because the avatar you've seen so often isn't me. Lowart isn't even real. I'm not real. I've never been real. I'm just a fake, a fabrication, a bundle of lies compressed down into a palatable personality, and fuck it, this joke has run its course. Mangahood at least gets this identity crisis over with fast. Wenri just has a chat with Al, Ed and Al fight for a bit to one of my favorite tunes in the whole soundtrack, and then they lay there and make amends. Was this whole thing a bit useless and out of place? Sure. Was it at least over quickly? Absolutely. And to be fair, I will concede that it shows that Al has doubts and fears, which does serve as character development. Although this specific character development never made me care much more for him, and most people I hear from seem to agree on that, so yeah, in general, it's still bad. So now it's time for 2003 to diverge heavily again for a little while. So I'm going to mention this briefly because some people have commented on these videos telling me that I'm not giving Brotherhood enough attention, and I honestly don't blame people for thinking that if they aren't keeping track of how many episodes of each series I've covered. Because I've covered approximately 23 episodes of 2003 up to this point, and I've only covered 9 episodes of Brotherhood. So naturally I'm going to be focusing more on 2003, and I'm going to have to continue to give it more emphasis for a bit longer. Of course, this means that Brotherhood is going to be getting way more emphasis later on as we're nearly halfway through 2003, but we aren't even 1/6 of the way through Mangahood yet. Now, 2003 certainly does some interesting things in this section. Namely, it helps us understand Scar even more than we already did, as a new group of Ishvalans that he has just ended up with gets attacked. Certainly in both versions we already have a lot of understanding as to why Scar feels the way he does and why he acts the way he does. But 2003 makes sure to consistently remind us and to show us that the Ishvalan people are still kicked into the dirt constantly, and in disturbing and horrifying ways. The more the anime does this, the less room there is for reconciliation between the Amestrian government and the Ishvalan people, and the more that Scar's actions seem to hold a certain level of validity. Actually, this whole section is going to place a lot of emphasis on Scar and draw a number of parallels between him and the brothers. Although, in a previous section I sort of missed something, because I said that the show consistently pairs Ed and Scar and compares them. I still think that it does that, but a number of people mention that their perception of things is that Al is meant to be compared with Scar, and I kind of agree with you there. Which means that it's good that I have regular commenters around to help me out, so thanks for that. After all, I mean, both Al and Scar have older brothers who attempted to perform human transmutation, and both of them have seen their brothers suffer for that mistake. They are also both very idealistic, even if their ideals are almost exact opposites of each other's. By pairing Al and Scar in this episode, the show forces us to consider the similarities and differences between them. However, even if I can appreciate that, this once again points to some annoying aspects of Al's character. Sure, we've seen that he'll pair up with Scar before, and we know that Al is pretty idealistic and believes in the best in others, so it fits his character to do this sort of thing even if I think it's really stupid. So yeah, he can pair up with Scar. No reason for me to bitch about that anymore. I just hate how Al talks about Ed with Scar, going so far as to even say that he doesn't care what happens to Ed. Once again, 2003 is making Al's feelings more extreme than they are in Mangahood, which is not the best idea as this whole section is already a bit silly. This show generally does a good job of being serious without being angsty, but this is a moment where we're very much starting to veer towards angst. The show also adds in this whole subplot with these two boys, Rick and a character that is exclusive to the 2003 anime, Rio. We learn that their mother was killed and that Rio misunderstood the circumstances surrounding her death. Rio, after all, saw their mother run away from them when the army came to attack, and Rio thought that she was a coward who had seen her children in harm's way and had booked it in the hopes of preserving herself. In reality, their mother really had terrible eyesight and couldn't see that the children were at the bottom of the stairs here, so she ran over to their room to find them. Because of this previous misunderstanding, Rio has kept what he believes to be a harmful truth from his brother, and his want to protect Rick from knowing what he believes happened makes their relationship more tense and less healthy than it could otherwise be. I believe that this is meant to reflect Ed and Al's relationship, and how Ed is holding back the fact that he blames himself for the fact that Al lost his body. As 2003 has done in the past, it is tying together a subplot with our major characters, in an attempt to show us something new about them. Now, Rio seems to want to forget the past, which is the exact opposite of Al. Obviously, the show wants us to consider how these characters differ. Importantly, this old fellow says that the people of Ishval value blood relations above all else. After Rico is kidnapped, and Rio is clearly willing to do anything to protect Rico. Which of course seems an awful lot like Ed's relationship with Al. Here, Al is being forced to stare the truth directly in its face, to see how much his brother obviously values him, how silly he's being, and how nothing should be able to break them apart. Again, parallels. Also, we need to consider some of the specifics of Rio's story. His whole personality has been dictated by what is basically a false memory. The memory that their mother ran away from them as they were about to get killed by the soldiers, as I mentioned. In a similar manner to Al, this boy needs to realize the truth of the matter. After all, Rio has mistakenly given into a narrative that his mother didn't love him, and Al is giving into a very similar false narrative that his mother never existed and that his so-called brother doesn't truly love him. So as we see Rio move towards understanding what really happened, Al moves there with him. It's a pretty effective method of exploring Al's psyche and understanding of himself, even if this whole arc is still built on a cracked foundation. The show also builds towards this nice cathartic moment where Al chooses to believe that Ed is his brother and that he is actually a real person and punches Barry right in the face. Then that connection between the brothers and Scar is strengthened when Scar kills Barry. Which leads to a moment that I kind of appreciate, even if it is purposefully convenient. This dude's backpack thing explodes and the throwing knife type devices fly outwards, hitting Rico in the chest. Fortunately though, this pendant that he kept from his mother keeps him safe. So his belief that his mother cared for him and his refusal to let go of these memories is the only thing that allows him to live. Also, once it's hit, it opens up and reveals the eye medicine, which reveals the truth. So the ability for them to understand the truth was predicated on one of the brothers at least trusting in the mother. It's a nice moment, I guess, even if, like I said, it's purposely and obviously contrived. More importantly though, there is one part of this whole arc that I love, that Scar clearly becomes a less extreme individual. He sees through Ed that not all state alchemists are bad and evil people who are just willing to follow any order. And it's implied that he's moving away to live with and help his fellow Ishvalan people survive. It's a very touching moment, and a moment that's going to make Scar's overall arc in this show really crushing. So with that, we've covered the identity crisis. Now let's move on to part of the story I've been waiting a long time to get to. The death of Hughes.